Nancy's blood ran cold as the words sank in. She understood now. The entire time, Nelly had been a pawn in a ritualistic scheme orchestrated by Johnson and Alhaji Dapo. Johnson had targeted Nancy, but when Nelly stepped into his life instead, she had unknowingly taken her best friend's place in a sinister ritual. Once upon a time, in a bustling hospital in Nigeria, two women, Dorothy and Ejiro, crossed paths by chance but bonded instantly. Both had just become mothers on the same day, sharing their joy in the hospital's postnatal ward. Dorothy, a kind-hearted mother with two sons, had finally been blessed with a daughter, Nelly. Ejiro, a single mother, held her only child, Nancy, with dreams of raising her to be strong, confident, and independent. Dorothy and Ejiro found solace and support in each other, laughing and chatting as they nursed their newborns side by side. What started as small talk quickly blossomed into a deep friendship. They discovered they shared similar values, hopes, and dreams for their daughters. By the time they left the hospital, they had promised to raise their daughters as sisters, to make sure Nancy and Nelly grew up with a bond as inseparable as theirs. From infancy to adolescence, Nancy and Nelly did everything together. Dorothy and Ejiro planned playdates, birthdays, family outings, and even enrolled the girls in the same schools: nursery, primary, and eventually secondary. The girls became known as the twins who aren't really twins because of their closeness and how they complemented each other. Nancy was outgoing, bold, and captivatingly beautiful, with a natural charm that turned heads wherever she went. She was outspoken, loved to laugh, and had a spark in her that drew people in. Ejiro, protective as a single mother, often reminded Nancy to guard her heart, warning her that the world could be harsh. Nelly, in contrast, was soft-spoken, shy, and reserved. She was the listener, the calm to Nancy's storm, and admired her friend's confidence. Dorothy taught Nelly to treasure Nancy as a sister, emphasizing that she was lucky to have a friend like her. Though Nelly was content in the background, she sometimes felt a quiet yearning for the kind of attention Nancy effortlessly attracted. But her loyalty to Nancy never wavered. They were, after all, sisters by heart. As they graduated from secondary school, Nancy and Nelly's bond remained strong, and they both got accepted to the same university. They shared a hostel room, bringing their friendship into a new chapter of independence and excitement. University life brought changes and challenges, but they faced everything together. Nancy's magnetic personality quickly made her popular. She joined social groups, excelled in academics, and effortlessly built a wide circle of friends. She was always the center of attention, with her bold and extroverted nature shining even brighter in this new setting. Nelly, as always, was Nancy's steadfast supporter. Though she didn't seek the spotlight, she was quietly admired by those who knew her. She was content to be in Nancy's shadow, but as she watched her friends soar, she felt a pang of envy she could hardly understand. Nancy noticed Nelly's reserved nature and tried to pull her out of her shell. "This is our time to shine, Nelly," she would say, nudging her friend to join her in new experiences. Nancy's adventurous side soon led her to suggest a way for them to make extra money. She wanted them to be financially independent, to buy what they wanted without constantly asking their parents. After discussing different ideas, Nancy proposed they start online marketing. Ejiro, who owned a popular clothing shop, became their first client. They agreed to promote Ejiro's clothing line on social media and earn small commissions for every sale they made. It was a perfect arrangement. Nancy handled the networking, and Nelly worked on the logistics and planning. They threw themselves into the work, taking pictures, creating posts, and managing inquiries. Nancy loved the thrill of engaging with customers, while Nelly enjoyed the organizational side. They were a great team, but their success would soon attract more than just buyers. One day, Nancy received a message from a man named Johnson, who showed interest in one of the outfits she had posted. Their initial conversation was purely business, but Johnson was charming and engaging. As they spoke more, the conversation turned personal. Johnson seemed genuinely interested in her, asking about her studies, her dreams, and what she loved most in life. Nancy found herself drawn to him, feeling a spark she hadn't felt before. Their chats became a nightly routine. Johnson had a way of making Nancy feel special, listened to, and seen in a way that went beyond a simple business exchange. Nancy was captivated by his charm, and though they had never met, she felt herself falling for him. After weeks of talking, she could no longer keep it a secret. One night, she told Nelly about her online crush, excitedly sharing her feelings and the things Johnson had said to her. As Nancy gushed about Johnson, Nelly smiled, but inside, she felt a pang of jealousy she couldn't explain. She wanted to be happy for her friend, but a part of her wished she could experience what Nancy was feeling. She hid her envy, pretending to support Nancy, while secretly hoping Johnson's interest in her friend would fade. But her jealousy slowly turned into resentment, clouding her judgment and tempting her to act on impulses she would later regret. One evening, driven by jealousy, Nelly made a choice that would change everything. She quietly took Johnson's phone number from Nancy's phone without her friend's knowledge. That night, Nelly messaged him, introducing herself as Nancy's friend. At first, the messages were harmless, but Nelly gradually shifted the tone, subtly feeding him lies about Nancy. Over the next few weeks, Nelly began sending Johnson photos of Nancy with other male friends, trying to make her appear flirtatious and untrustworthy. Johnson, influenced by Nelly's deception, started pulling away from Nancy. Each day, Nancy felt his coldness more acutely. The messages that once made her heart race now left her confused and hurt. She confided in Nelly, wondering if she had done something wrong. Nelly, concealing her guilt, feigned sympathy and acted as though she were there to support her friend. Meanwhile, Johnson's attention shifted to Nelly, who continued messaging him, painting herself as the loyal, trustworthy friend who had exposed Nancy's flaws. She took pleasure in her secret victory, feeling a thrill as Johnson began to see her in a new light. Her jealousy had transformed into a desire to win him over, even if it meant betraying the friend who had always loved her unconditionally. As time went on, Nelly and Johnson began officially dating, but she hid this from Nancy, introducing him as James to prevent her friend from discovering the truth. For Nancy, this was the first time meeting Johnson in person. She was struck by his charm. Happy for her friend, and unaware of the painful betrayal lurking beneath the surface. Johnson, however, found himself unexpectedly drawn to Nancy. Her lively personality and genuine nature stirred something in him, but he knew he was now involved with Nelly. Nancy, ever supportive, accepted Johnson as her friend's new boyfriend, grateful that they had all moved past any tension. But her happiness was short-lived. Shortly after Nelly and Johnson's relationship began, Nelly's health took a sudden turn for the worse. She grew weak, constantly fatigued, and struggled to keep up with her daily life. Dorothy and Edgero, deeply concerned, accompanied her to doctors, hoping for a diagnosis, but every test came back inconclusive. Nelly's condition only worsened, her once bright spirit fading as her body weakened. Nancy stayed by her side, comforting her as best as she could, desperate to help her friend recover. But the more she saw Nelly suffer, the more she sensed something was wrong, something beyond a simple illness. Her instincts told her there was more to Nelly's condition than they could see. As Nelly's condition worsened, she grew increasingly frail and weak, On one of her final nights, she looked up at Nancy with haunted eyes and whispered, "I'm so sorry." Nancy, confused and heartbroken, tried to reassure her, but Nelly's words were filled with regret. The next morning, Nelly passed away, leaving Nancy devastated and her family broken with grief. Nancy struggled to make sense of her friend's final words. She was overwhelmed with sorrow, but beneath her grief was a gnawing feeling that Nelly's death was not natural. She started replaying every moment in her head, looking for clues. A few days later, as she packed up Nelly's things in their hostel, she stumbled upon a small, leather-bound diary hidden in the bottom drawer. Nancy opened the diary, feeling a mixture of dread and curiosity. The first few entries were filled with memories of their childhood, simple reflections of the good times they shared. But as she flipped through the pages, the tone of Nelly's writing shifted. She read about Nelly's envy, her secret resentment, and the way she had longed for her life. Nancy's hands trembled as she read the diary's entries, which revealed a side of Nelly she had never known. She read through passages where Nelly confessed her deep-seated jealousy, how she had secretly resented Nancy's popularity, beauty, and carefree spirit. Nelly admitted she'd wanted to have Nancy's life, to feel adored, confident, and admired. Nancy's heart sank as she read her friend's hidden feelings. She could hardly believe the depth of Nelly's pain, a jealousy so powerful it had consumed her best friend. But then, the diary took an even darker turn. Nelly described the fateful moment when she had taken Johnson's number from Nancy's phone and begun messaging him behind her back. She wrote about how she'd manipulated Johnson, lying about Nancy to win his affections for herself. Nancy's chest tightened as she realized just how deep the betrayal went. Her best friend, her sister by heart, had actively worked to ruin her happiness, driven by envy and resentment. Then came the horrifying part. In the later entries, Nelly wrote about her fears regarding Johnson, who she now referred to as James. She detailed strange encounters and dark hints he'd dropped about his father, a powerful man named Alhaji Dapo. Nelly wrote that Alhaji Dapo wasn't merely a businessman. He had secrets tied to rituals and practices that had allowed him to amass his wealth and influence. As Nelly's diary entries continued, her words became frantic, revealing a growing dread that she was trapped in something far darker than she had bargained for. Nancy's stomach churned as she read Nelly's final entries. Nelly described moments where she'd felt watched, times when she was certain something sinister was happening around her. She suspected that Alhaji Dapo's success was rooted in dark practices involving sacrifices, practices in which young women were lured into his circle only to be used for rituals. Nelly had started to connect the dots, realizing that her own sudden illness and deteriorating health might not be a coincidence. She had written about nights spent in terror, the feeling that something was draining the life out of her. Then came the most devastating revelation. Nelly had written a chilling line. This was meant for Nancy. I was only a replacement. Nancy's blood ran cold as the words sank in. She understood now. The entire time, Nelly had been a pawn in a ritualistic scheme orchestrated by Johnson and Alhaji Dapo. Johnson had targeted Nancy, but when Nelly stepped into his life instead, she had unknowingly taken her best friend's place in a sinister ritual. Nelly's diary entries ended abruptly, with a haunting final note where she wrote about her fear, her regret, and the apology she'd whispered to Nancy before her death. Nancy closed the diary, her hands shaking with a mixture of grief, rage, and guilt. She felt a wave of anger, not only for Nelly's betrayal, but for the unimaginable horror her friend had endured in her final days. She knew she couldn't let Nelly's death go unanswered. Johnson and Alhaji Dapo had used her friend as a pawn in their twisted plans, and now they were going to pay. Nancy knew she couldn't face this fight alone. She went to Nelly's brothers, Samuel and David, and shared everything. She showed them the diary, and together they read the harrowing entries. Both brothers were heartbroken, but their sorrow quickly turned into a fierce determination. They agreed to help Nancy bring justice for their sister, no matter the risks. They decided to gather evidence, every piece of information they could find that linked Johnson and his father to Nelly's death. Nancy also reached out to Aid, a close friend studying criminal law, who was horrified but committed to helping them build a case. They realized they needed undeniable proof to confront men as powerful as Alhaji Dapo and his son. Nancy and her newfound allies devised a plan to trap Johnson and make him reveal the truth. Nancy would need to re-establish contact with him, pretending to be oblivious to his role in Nelly's death. It was a dangerous game, but she was willing to risk it. She messaged Johnson, suggesting they meet up, framing her words as if she were simply trying to connect with an old friend after Nelly's passing. Johnson took the bait, agreeing to meet her, unaware of the trap that lay ahead. When they met, Nancy hid her disgust and anger, acting as if she were simply seeking closure. She casually brought up his father, pretending to be curious about the secrets to his success. Johnson, flattered by her attention, began to talk. He hinted at the sacrifices required to maintain wealth and influence, hinting that he and his father used methods others wouldn't dare attempt. Nancy kept the conversation going, subtly pressing him for more information while carefully recording every word. Over the following weeks, Nancy continued her act, slowly extracting more details from Johnson. Each conversation confirmed the twisted practices that Nelly had written about. Alhaji Dapo's rituals required human sacrifices, and Johnson's role was to lure unsuspecting young women into his father's web. Nancy felt sickened with each new revelation, but her determination only grew stronger. Finally, after gathering enough evidence, Nancy and her allies planned a confrontation. They arranged for Johnson to meet her one last time, but this time, he would be surrounded by people who knew the truth. Samuel, David, and Aid were hidden nearby, ready to capture his confession on video. Nancy walked into the meeting with Nelly's diary in her hand, her heart pounding with the weight of her friend's memory. Johnson arrived, his usual charm masking the darkness within. Nancy's face remained cold and unreadable as she placed Nelly's diary on the table. Without warning, she began to read aloud, choosing the parts that detailed Nelly's fear, her regrets, and her suspicions about Johnson's true intentions. Johnson's face turned pale as Nancy continued reading, her voice unwavering. When she finished, she looked him in the eyes and demanded he confess. Johnson tried to deny everything, but Samuel and David stepped forward, blocking his escape. Aid, with his phone recording, warned him that everything he said would be used against him. Cornered, Johnson panicked, his composure shattering as he finally admitted the truth. He confessed that he had been forced into his father's schemes, luring young women like Nelly into a trap that would ultimately lead to their deaths. The confession was heart-wrenching, but it provided the final piece of evidence they needed. Johnson revealed that he had indeed targeted Nancy first, and that his father had intended for her to be the offering. Nelly's intervention had unwittingly saved Nancy, but had condemned her own life in the process. Armed with the confession and the diary, Nancy and her friends went to the police, who opened a formal investigation. The case took time, facing obstacles from Alhaji Dapo's influence and connections, but the public outcry following the exposure of Johnson's confession pressured the authorities to act. Alhaji Dapo's reputation crumbled, his dark secrets exposed to the world, and he was eventually arrested along with Johnson. For Dorothy and Ejiro, the arrests brought a bittersweet sense of closure. They had lost a daughter, but her story had brought light to a horrifying darkness that would have continued unchecked. Dorothy found strength in the knowledge that Nelly's courage in documenting her final days had brought about justice. Nancy, though heartbroken, felt a measure of peace knowing that Nelly's death had not been in vain. She had kept her promise to bring the truth to light and to ensure that her friend's suffering would not be forgotten. In memory of her friend, Nancy founded a women's advocacy organization called the Nelly Foundation for Women's Safety. Its mission was to educate young women about the warning signs of abusive relationships and manipulative behavior. The foundation organized workshops, created online resources, and provided support for women at risk. Nancy became a dedicated advocate, sharing her story and Nelly's as a way to raise awareness and prevent other young women from falling victim to similar dangers. Dorothy, Ejiro, and Nelly's brothers poured their energy into the foundation as well, finding healing in helping others. The foundation grew, touching lives across communities and empowering young women to make safer choices. Through her work, Nancy felt connected to Nelly's spirit, knowing that her friend's story had become a beacon of hope. Nancy's story is a testament to the power of friendship, loyalty, and courage. It shows the darkness that jealousy and deception can lead to, but also the strength that can arise from tragedy. As Nancy moves forward with the memory of Nelly, she invites us all to honor the people we've lost by standing up for justice, spreading awareness, and protecting each other. To our viewers, Nelly's story is a call to action. Please share this story to shed light on the hidden dangers that young women face and let Nelly's memory inspire change. Speak up against manipulation, support one another, and remember that every voice counts in the fight for justice. By watching, sharing, and joining the conversation, you can make a difference. Let's ensure that no one else suffers in silence, and that justice always finds its way. Thanks for watching.